morning everybody and welcome to this meeting of Mid-Suffolk District Council Cabinet. I'm Councillor Susie Morley, leader of Mid-Suffolk District Council, and I'm chairing this meeting today. May I remind you of some domestic arrangements? Please ensure that microphones are turned off when not in use. Please do not interrupt other speakers or hold separate conversation while others are speaking. If you're attending the meeting to speak and persistently interrupt the meeting, you may be asked to leave. Please ensure your mobile phones are on silent or switched off. And finally, we will be using e-voting for this meeting on the modern.gov app, so please could members make sure they are logged in and ready to use the app. I would like to remind everyone present that this meeting will be broadcast live to the internet and will be capable of repeated viewing. The whole of the meeting will be filmed, except where there are confidential or exempt items. If you make a representation to the meeting, you will be deemed by the Council to have consented to being filmed. By entering this meeting as a speaker, you are also consenting to being recorded by the Council and to the possible use of those images and sound recordings for webcasting and or training purposes. The Council, members of the public and the press may record, film, photograph or broadcast this meeting when the public and the press are not lawfully excluded. I'm now going to move to the agenda. Item 1, apologies for absence.
Thank you, Chair. We have received apologies from Councillor Brewster.
Thank you. Item 2 is to receive declarations of pecuniary, other registerable or non-registerable interest by members. Are there any to declare? No? Thank you. Item 3, MCA/21/51 is to confirm the minutes held on the 6th of April 2022. Are there any points regarding the accuracy of the minutes? Can I have a proposer, please? Councillor Richardson, propose. Councillor Whitehead, second. Thank you. The Governance Officer, if you would conduct the vote, please.
Thank you, members. The vote is now started. Chair, may I take your vote?
4.
Thanks. Councillor Haddingham? 4. Councillor Byrne, have you, please? Thank you, Chair. That is carried. That's unanimous.
Thank you very much. Item 4 is to receive notifications of petitions in accordance with the Council's petition scheme.
None received.
Item 5, any questions by councillors?
None received.
Item 6, matters referred by the Overview and Scrutiny or the Joint Audit and Standards Committees.
There are no matters referred, Chair.
Thank you. Item 7 is the forthcoming decisions list. Does anybody have any comments? Item 8, MCA/2022/2. The response to the National Grid non-statutory consultation on the East Anglia Green overhead line project. And I'm going to invite the Cabinet Member for Planning to introduce this report. Councillor Byrne.
Thank you. Good morning. This is paper MCA /22/2. And it provides you with the proposed response to the non-statutory consultation on the East Anglia Green overhead line project. This is a big and complicated proposal that is worrying for a great many of our residents. The proposed response shown at Appendix A covers a detailed list of technical matters which I won't go through at this stage. The main thing I would like to emphasise is that we are proposing to object. Our overriding preference is for a coordinated offshore approach to minimise onshore infrastructure and the associated impacts on the communities and environment. Subsea cabling options are being developed for the north of England and Scotland, so why not here? In the absence of greater clarity around the options for strategic offshore coordination of transmission reinforcement and a subsea alternatives for this project, I propose that we object to the proposed development at this time. On that basis, I move the recommendation in section 3 of your report and would ask for a seconder. Thank you.
Councillor Fleming?
Thank you. I'm happy to second this proposal.
Thank you very much. I've invited all members to attend to present their responses to this consultation, and you will be allowed to speak once for 3 minutes, and this will be timed. There's Councillors Mellon, Warboys, Field and Wellham. You will all be allowed to speak. Written responses have also been received from Councillors Pratt, Eburn, Norris and Warboys, and these will be taken into consideration in the response that we give to the National Grid. So I'm going to invite you each in turn to speak. Councillor Mellon?
Thank you, Chair. So I'd first like to make a couple of overarching points about the Council's draft response before looking at the details. Firstly, the proposed route for the overhead cables, shown as a graduated swathe on National Grid maps, by my reckoning directly crosses 8 or maybe 9 council wards, from Palgrave and Gislingham in the north, down through Bacton and Mendlesham, Stow Upland, touching the Stonhams ward, then Needham Market, Batsford and Ringshaw, Blakenham and finally Bromford. Of these wards, I just make the point that most are represented by councillors in the opposition Green and Liberal Democrat group. I make it something like 8 opposition councillors wards affected compared to 3 administration councillors. That being said, I welcome the opportunity that all affected councillors have been given to state their concerns to this Cabinet meeting and hopefully have some influence on the Council's response. Secondly, as myself and Councillor Morley have already discussed, this is an issue where I think there is likely to be a strong cross-party consensus, which means that the Council can speak powerfully with one voice. There may be some slight differences in approach, but I think we are generally all on the same page. Since I only have 3 minutes, I will leave my colleagues to make some more detailed points. However, our main concerns about this consultation are as follows. Firstly, the timing of this consultation seems to be inappropriate, i.e. too soon, since the Government is expecting this month the report of the Offshore Transmission Review Group set up by the Department of Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. Whilst we welcome the increase in renewable energy production, there is a lack of strategic long-term planning to connect multiple offshore wind farms into the national grid in a coordinated way. Thirdly, the proposed overhead lines and pylons will have a massive impact on the area through which they pass, visually dominating the landscape and also impacting heavily on many heritage assets along the route. The overground route is only the best value option for National Grid if no intrinsic value is ascribed to these landscapes. And then fourthly, there's a huge issue of blight affecting properties on or close to the proposed route. And given that this is only the first stage in a very long process, this could go on for many years. I largely agree with the Council's draft response, but I'd like to encourage a few amendments. The response on page 2 highlights undergrounding the whole route as something that requires further consideration. I think this would be vastly more expensive and more environmentally destructive than an undersea cable route, and therefore seems an unrealistic option. Secondly, some individual bullet points, if taken out of context, appear to show support for the scheme and should be removed or edited. And lastly, the benefits to the communities through which the line may pass. On page 8, some potential benefits to discuss, but I think we should be demanding more of National Grid. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Mellon. Councillor Warboys.
Thank you,
remain
Chair.
seated.
Okay. A few comments. I'll probably repeat what has been proposed by Councillor Burns and my colleague Councillor Moen. First, the consultation. The response performer does much to establish the need for and leaders to support this proposal as the UK adopts widespread use of renewable energy. So far, so good. But this is the only green element of this proposal and the only significant consultative part. It assumes that we have decided on the car model and now for the options list. There are no viable alternatives proposed. This consultation is about refining the proposal. There are proposals about the transmission of power through Suffolk. It is not driven by Suffolk energy needs. The question needs to be asked, why through when it can go round? National Grid has another project, Sea Link, which connects Sizewell with Richborough in Kent, an offshore link. National Grid identified 23 possible reinforcement solutions and has produced a corridor and preliminary routing and siting study report. E7, the proposed scheme, is not the cheapest. The closest to E7, but with an offshore link between Norwich and Grain, is East 9. A difference of 857 million. An easy decision, one should expect. However, these costs do not factor in the individual cost to every householder within 300 metres of the route. A study by Dr. Sally Sims, a lecturer at Oxford Brookes University, reveals that valuers and agents tend to estimate the effect that overhead high voltage lines have on property values, usually between 2 and 12%. Her findings confirm that living close to overhead power lines, and particularly pylons, has a negative effect on the resale value of homes, as much as 38%. Homes within 300 metres of an overhead power line sell for as much as a third less than similar properties. In addition, there is a socio-economic effect of planning blight whilst construction is underway. An offshore route would not be without its environmental impact, but in its own assessment, National Grid claims it is possible to mitigate this. Gislingham Ward is one small section, about 10% of the proposed route. The route passes Wickham, Skeeth, skirts Gislingham, proceeds across the southern end of Mellish Common, passing 3 historic monument sites in Burgate, through Wortham and touching the edge of Wortham Link, a triple SI, before crossing the Waveney Valley to Bressingham. Wortham alone has 58 Grade 2 buildings. This part of Suffolk retains its medieval settlement patterns, interspersed with commons, ancient woodlands and rolling farmland. It is an important asset as an amenity to local residents and also an important aspect of what makes Suffolk attractive to tourists. This cannot be valued easily, but to dismiss it as collateral damage is short-sighted to say the least.
Thank you, Councillor Warboys.
The overarching National Policy Statement for Energy, EM5, sets out the factors influencing
Warboys,
site
your 3
and route.
minutes is up.
Sorry, am I going on?
Okay.
You've been stopped.
Oh, I can't hear you, I'm sorry. Can I just sum up?
You may finish your sentence.
Last sentence. I asked Suffolk District Council, rejecting totally this proposal, to appeal directly to Ofgem and the Secretary of State that the offshore Route 9 be reappraised in the light of the excessive costs of the overland route in terms of financial impact, harm to our shared heritage and loss of amenity to our residents. These factors should be considered in addition to the basic structural costs.
Thank you, Councillor Warboys.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Field.
Thank you. I hope my words are somewhat shorter, but there's always a risk. To put a local spin on it, the small rural village of Floaton is within my Braycombe ward. It suffers the presence of an existing 400 kV grid connection from Norwich towards Twinstead T, a single pylon line, which has been in place since the grid connection point at Bullen Lane, 1.7 kilometres east of the village, was constructed. It has also tolerated the twin line that connects Sizewell to the grid, and grid connections and other assets have multiplied recently. The Bramford substation and Bullen Lane will house the EA1 and EA3 conversion and connection points. The village recognises that these assets are of benefit to the country at large, but there's a limit to its tolerance, and East Anglia Green exceeds that tolerance. The proposed route affects many communities, but in Floaton it runs between the church, which is on the southern side of the village, and Gate Farm, through a gap of only 500 metres. It goes over Valley Farm, Mousehill Barn and Floaton Hall towards the substation, so it has a substantial impact on the core of the village. This really is a step too far. Should we expect Floaton community to live with another major degradation to their environment? I believe not. Is there any alternative? There are in fact three: to improve building insulation and provide local power generation storage, to place the 400 kV lines underground, or to route the power directly from the point of generation down the North Sea to the capital. We are told the last two options have been considered but rejected, largely on ground of costs. Underground lines, we're told, are 3 to 10 times the cost of pylon lines, perhaps 3 times in rural areas and 10 times in a city. We don't know, but the option should be explored in detail and estimates made public. The technology is not revolutionary, but well known and deployed in areas such as AONBs. The impact on electricity bills across the country of this necessary good reinforcement should be identified and be a penalty on whom will benefit. It should not be hidden behind insurances, and National Grid have examined the possibilities and find them too costly. The more attractive option will be to route the connections directly from North Sea assets using DC technology to the area of need. The converter stations to achieve this are required wherever the power is landed, so the increased cost is limited to that additional cable length. The technology involved is known, and cable laying process in undersea does not involve trenching and ductwork burial on land requires. We informed that the power capacity required would involve multiple cables, which is true, but this directly comparable to the combined capacity of 5 existing links. The 270-kilometre Norwegian link suggests that the length of connection required would not be a problem. Grid statements on the cost of that link at 4 million working hours perhaps indicate what could be expected.
Councillor Field, final sentence, please.
Okay. The only estimate of the cost of the grid I could find was 0.2 pence per kilowatt hour delivered. That's the cost of connections. If we multiply the entire cost by 4, duplicating the entire grid at the lower of the underground cost estimates, it would add 0.8 of a penny to the 32 pence I'm currently paying, a 2.5% increase, which is not welcome but tolerable to limit the damage to Suffolk. In conclusion, I certainly support the proposal that the district advocates an undersea link.
Councillor Field.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Wellham. 3 minutes.
I've timed, it's okay, don't worry. You won't have to remind me. Before speaking about the proposed route as it may affect Mid-Suffolk, and in particular the ward served by Councillor Eburn and myself, I'd like to ask members if they would consider the most logical and least damaging method of transmitting energy from the North Sea to Tilbury in the Thames estuary. Why would you first connect offshore wind farms to Norwich and then erect miles of 50-metre high pylons through South Norfolk, Suffolk and Essex? Before any transmission lines are implemented overland or underground, a national energy strategy is essential. Suffolk MPs should join with MPs in other parts of the country which might be threatened by similar schemes to ensure a UK-wide strategy is approved before this proposal is considered. Residents have told me they are confused by the approach of showing a band of interest rather than a specified route. Most of those who have homes or own land from which the pylons would be visible are against an overhead scheme. Others who fear the disruption of an underground scheme object to such a scheme, and some believe they should support the overhead scheme as the least worst option. But the underground scheme would be greatly disruptive during construction and render unproductive a great swathe of land for many years. Clearly, the consultation is flawed, as there is no comparison of costs between overland, underground and undersea options, nor is there any comparison of disbenefits of the three options. For instance, effects on listed buildings, wildlife habitat, visual amenity, agricultural production, disruption during construction, and the administrative costs of dealing with potentially thousands of individuals, the economic cost due to loss of tourism and other knock-on effects all weigh against the current proposal. Through our ward, if the proposal goes ahead, 50-metre columns will stride across the high clay plateau and will be seen for miles around. Listed buildings are within the coloured band. The effect on SSSI's wooded areas, and in particular Gipping Great Wood and a whole range of conservation and biodiversity projects, is given no consideration. Some of the comments of National Grid staff have been unhelpful and in many cases questionable. We don't take matters into account at this stage, I was told. The technology for an undersea option doesn't really exist. When questioned further, I was told that expertise does exist in the private sector, but surely now is the time to come together to devise a strategy for the UK. In discussion with one of the staff at the Needham Market Consultation, he and I agreed that the undersea option over the life of the scheme would add only a few pence per year to the average household electricity bill, and that's before taking into account the savings from using renewable sources of energy rather than fossil fuels. Members of Cabinet, you have an opportunity today to tell Government that this proposal and other similar schemes are unacceptable, and using your contacts within Government to urge an end to this piecemeal approach and produce a national energy strategy fit for the future. Thank you.
Spot on, Councillor Wellham. Thank you very much. So I've received written responses also from Councillors Pratt, Eburn, Norris and Warboys, and all of those will be taken into consideration in the response that we give to National Grid, and they will also be added to our online papers, so they're available for public viewing. Do I have any questions from Cabinet? Do I have any questions from other members? Councillor Stringer?
I didn't realise I'd missed the opportunity to be able to speak on behalf of my residents.
The monitoring team did send out an email inviting people to notify them should they wish to speak. I do not believe we received such a thing
I
from
had
you.
a question answered in here that I would be given the opportunity to speak if I turned up. I didn't realise I had to put it in writing that I wish to attend.
Thank you, Councillor Stringer. We sent out an email. We asked members to register with us so that we could monitor how many speakers we were going to have for this meeting. So there was an email forwarded to you.
Then my mistake.
I'm happy to make an exception and allow you to speak for 3 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you. On behalf of the residents of Mendersham, we're already having significant issues with the existing pylons. The amount of cabling on them is at this moment being quadrupled. So the visual impact of the existing run is already being impacted on the residents of Mendersham. Can we ask, if we're looking at the wording that we already have in our submission, are we able to introduce the word strongly in front of the word object? Because I believe that most of my residents, and I believe the feeling of this council, is that we strongly object to this. So if we could...
Councillor Stringer, this is your chance to have 3 minutes to speak.
Yes, I am speaking.
Not to ask questions at this point.
Sorry, it was a... Okay, fine. Right, I have to reword what I'm going to say. Okay. This proposed broad rough route in my community, it seems incredibly ill thought through. It goes through existing ancient woodland against the own advice of National Grid. It also goes through community woodlands, which would render them then almost useless. I'd also like to see whether we could be a bit stronger about undergrounding. Undergrounding is a very nuclear option in terms of the impact on the land itself. It does actually just sacrifice the environment for aesthetics for decades afterwards, because you basically destroy all sorts of rhizome networks, etc., and the land will take decades to heal if we do go underground. So I'd basically rule that out if I could. I think we also need to be a bit stronger about land values. Land values here, along the section of my ward I've calculated, would have over £4 million worth of impact on property values. Now, that may be easily mitigated or lost in the mix, but many of those properties use that value to fund business borrowing. So if that value is taken straight away off their value, they will be in a negative equity situation with the borrowers and banks for their own businesses. So actually this will have a massive economic impact on my area and Mendlesham wider. So I don't think we should easily dismiss the land value thing, because it will have a further impact. Also, in terms of the consultation, this doesn't feel, I have to say, like a consultation. It seems like we have the opportunity to fine-tune a decision already made. For me, a consultation would have a range of options with the associated costs, and I think if we could ask for those to be fleshed out more, I think that would be hugely beneficial. So thank you for the ability to put some of the points from Mendlesham Ward. And like I say, we from here don't just object, we strongly object. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Stringer. Do Cabinet have any questions? Do other members? Councillor Fleming, question?
Thank you, Councillor Morley. I would just like to make sure, I have some comments that I would like to make publicly on our proposed response, and I'm not sure whether I should make them now or later when you open it up for Cabinet.
Is it a question? Or
It's not a question.
Then we'll save that for debate.
Thank you.
Does anybody, Councillor Field?
Thank you. The question really is, none of us are particularly expert in this area of endeavour. I wondered whether Suffolk is considering any way employing an expert who will be capable of evaluating the proposals and providing an assessment of estimates to ensure that we get a understandable and reasoned response and some assurance that we have some independent evaluation.
I'm not sure I've got anybody here who can actually answer that question at the moment, Councillor Field, but it's something that we can follow up on afterwards.
I think, if I may advocate for a moment, there are such people who have that sort of depth of knowledge, who could provide much better guidance than we can from individual councillor positions.
Thank you. Just before we go into debate, I would like to make an amendment to the recommendations. The recommendation is that the Assistant Director for Planning and Building Control, in collaboration with a Cabinet member for planning, and I would like to add myself as leader on that, because we will be delivering a letter together with the response, and that letter will be in my name, and so I need to be part of that discussion. Are you happy to accept that, Councillor Byrne? Councillor Whitehead? Okay, thank you very much. So, who wants to start us off on the debate? Councillor Fleming.
Yes, thank you very much. And, you know, a lot of work has gone into this on behalf of the officers and all members. I think we've all made a huge effort to try to get to grips and understand what's going on, as have local residents. And I'd just like to say publicly to local residents, thank you too, because your input into this has been really enormous. And going to parish council meetings, listening to what everyone has to say, there is an enormous concern out there for what's at stake. And I do thank everyone for their interest in this project and the strategic view that local residents are taking. This isn't about NIMBYism. It's about a major national decision. I just want to make a couple of comments on the proposed response itself. And just looking at the principle, which I think I absolutely support our objection. And I'm not sure that tempering the objections by saying it's strong, very strong, or what. I think an objection is probably strongest standing on its own. But also, I would like us to bring out in this letter the fact that there's been no public consultation on the fundamental decision as to whether to onshore or offshore, and on the particular routes given that it were to be onshored. I haven't seen a public consultation about that. Maybe I've missed it. But I think, as has been said, this almost seems like a done deal. And I feel that there should be much more public openness about the fundamental decision and the cost-benefit analysis and the financial background that has led National Grid to prefer an onshore system, because we simply don't have that information in the public domain. And I feel that our letter should ask for it in very strong terms. There is also the financial analysis, as also has been pointed out, that we do have seems to be fairly superficial and doesn't seem to take into account things like devaluation of property values, devaluation of the landscape for various reasons, but particularly for tourism and the tourist economy. I've seen no quantitative financial harm out there for us to assess these things. So the entire financial background to the decision, I feel, is lacking, and that we must ask for it. And I will be saying the same to the County Council. On undergrounding, I felt we might throw in an example of the Waveney Valley, which has been discussed, because it is a particularly sensitive area. I feel we should also throw in any discussions we've had with our colleagues in Norfolk, which I know we have had. Maybe Baber will do the same with Essex, I don't know. But it's very important that we show that we're talking to our neighbouring local authorities. On the key technical issues, we've got a paragraph first off on AONBs, and there's only one AONB in Baber and Mid-Suffolk, and it's not in Mid-Suffolk. I would like to see landscape and visual impacts as a paragraph following the discussion on AONBs, because it is really the key issue here is landscape and visual impacts. And I'd like to see the words visual impacts added to the landscape subject title, because there are a lot of visual impacts at stake. Also, I would like us to see more discussion under the topic of landscape and visual impacts on tower types. During the consultation, National Grid was very reluctant to show us the options for the different types of tower, and it may well matter if we are, despite our best efforts, forced to accept this onshore project. Do we really have a proper idea of the benefits of having 35-metre high T-type pylons as opposed to 50-metre high, the classical pylon types? That's quite a big difference, and it was not brought out fully in the consultation. I think we need to talk about it more in our response. Also, we don't talk about the effects of this on small private aircraft. There are a number of small airfields in mid-Suffolk. I'm sorry, I'm probably going on beyond my time. But I know of one that almost certainly has been overlooked in Wortham. And I'm not sure they even know, properly that this is going on. I hope so. But there is a real issue here with small aircraft that isn't discussed. And just to conclude, I feel that our letter should provide maybe half a dozen bullet points at the end, where our main, the key points of what we're trying to convey are written down, so that anyone picking this up can, in 5 minutes, understand what we're trying to say. So that's, thank you very much for letting me speak.
Thank you, Councillor Fleming. And this is an important subject and it deserves a full airing. Does anybody else wish to contribute? Councillor Galt?
Thanks very much, Chair. I think that there clearly is a high degree of consensus on this matter, and that's no surprise. I would say that certainly in terms of my contact with parishes in my ward and beyond, that the concern is actually quite wide in our county, let alone in our district. And it's not just those that are within the corridor that are affected by this. A great many people enjoy our landscape and are very concerned about this issue. And while I'm on that, while I'm reading the covering report, I see in our risk assessment we put something, a highly unlikely thing that we will fail to consult or fail to demonstrate community leadership. I think this is a wonderful opportunity for this council to demonstrate community leadership in the strength of the response that it makes to what is called a consultation. But for those of you old enough to remember Lord Denning, once Master of the Rolls, I've been trying to find this, I can't find it. He laid down a very good definition of what constituted consultation, and I don't think this would meet the Denning test. I did hear on the radio a representative of National Grid being interviewed on this, and reasonable points were being put to him about the consideration of options. And he said, well, actually, our hands are tied on this because the government, I'm paraphrasing, but not by much, the government has obliged us to seek the cheapest solution to this. Now, I think cheapest and easiest maybe for National Grid. I would hope that government would take a slightly wider view of what constitutes cost here. And I'm certainly not going to repeat all the points that have been made about, clearly we ought to object to this and ought to do it in the strongest possible terms. I'm not going to repeat or go over the alternatives. I think we know what we are, and I think there is a consensus about the way this should go. But actually, and the point that has been made, I think, by Councillor Wellham, and then in your own amendment, Chair, to the covering report about adding yourself and a letter going in your name, expressing the council's opposition to this proposal, is very, very important indeed, because actually what may appear to be cheap in the short term, I don't think really is cheap at all, and certainly isn't going to be once you start to calculate all the impacts that the proposed solutions would have. So I think we need to make a very strong objection to this. I think the point about taking this to government and how our government and how it views these issues is tremendously important. So I hope that we will harness our objection to the objections being raised by our MPs in Suffolk to get the greatest political impact that we can. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Gould. Councillor Byrne? It's you.
Thank you very much. I don't propose to go over any of the ground that's already been gone over. We've heard some very useful comments and observations this morning. I'm very pleased to see that we've got a pretty good consensus across the board, across the political board of this council, and I am concerned that as many of our communities are represented in the response that we ultimately give. I'm going to have a bit of work to do after this, transcribing from the recording Jessica's comments and Peter's comments too, and Andrew's. But I can ask Andy and Keith and Roland and John if they wouldn't mind sending me their written versions so that I've got them in front of me when Susie and I'm sorry, I'm being very familiar. We should be a little more, but we're all friends here. So when we go through this and consolidate those responses and pop them into the final consultation response, it would help me enormously if we could do that. So thank you very much.
Councillor Whitehead?
Thank you. I'm struggling to remember any time when I sat in this chamber and agreed with everything that everybody said, but this is an occasion. I can't disagree with anything that everybody said. I'm no expert on this, and I think my only hope is this is not a serious proposal by National Grid, but just a trial. I certainly agree with the comment Councillor Field made about employing an expert. I think that's really vital. When my ward was going to be affected with the East Anglia 1 to 4, I was pleased to see that it was all undergrounded from Borsey to Bramford. And there was a lot of destruction at the time, but now walking across the footpaths where those cables went, it really is impossible to see any effect. And my understanding, those undergrounding was taking under rivers and trunk roads and all sorts. And it obviously was expensive, but now it's done and gone, and they're hidden. And so that clearly underground is better than overground. But taking it down the North Sea, to me, seems most sensible. And when I read these big proposals for ginormous solar farms in Morocco and cables from Morocco to the UK that go into the Bay of Biscay and the Atlantic Ocean, then surely anything's possible. So I just think we should object it in the strongest terms possible. That's my view. Thank you.
Does anybody else wish to contribute? Councillor Gould?
Thank you. It's not really a second bite. I just wanted, given the Councillor Field proposal, which seems to have been seconded by Councillor Whitehead, whether we've got the ability at this meeting to make a decision to do that, to appoint an expert to support the Council's opposition.
I'm going to look to Tom, but I'm conscious that he may not have heard the comment when it was made in real time because he joined us later. So I think the proposal that I heard from Councillor Field was that if we need to, that we appoint an additional expert, or an expert externally, who can support us in challenging the proposals, conscious that it's a highly complex consultation, I'll use the word loosely, but a highly complex consultation that we would need to look to. So, Tom, does that sound like a reasonable approach? Obviously, separately, we'll look at how we fund it. He nodded.
Okay, thank you. So, if nobody else wishes to contribute, so the recommendation is that the Assistant Director for Planning and Building Control, in collaboration with the Leader and the Cabinet Member for Planning, consider any proposed amendments to the suggested response and be authorised to make amendments before submitting a response to the Government. So I'm now going to ask the Governance Officer to conduct that vote.
Thank you, Chair. The vote is now in progress on your app, and it is an amended recommendation. Chair, 4. Thank you. Councillor Haddingham? Oh. Chair, that's 8 votes for, so that's unanimous.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. Moving on to item 9 is MCA/22/3, the Cost of Living Report and Action Plan. And I now invite the Cabinet Member of Health and Wellbeing to introduce his report. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Chair. If I may, I'd like to start by thanking the officers present for producing this paper, and particularly to Nadeem, our Assistant Director for Communities and Wellbeing, as this will in fact be his last meeting with us. So thank you, Nadeem, for all of your hard work over the last few months, and I wish you all the very best in the future. In introducing this report and the associated action plan, I want to recognise at once the importance of this issue. I know that residents and their families across our district have faced significant challenges in recent months, from rising prices in gas, electricity, fuel and food, and will likely continue to do so for the remainder of this year, with inflation due to peak at 10% in Q4. We shouldn't underestimate the significance of this. For some people, this will be the highest rate of inflation in their lifetime, myself included. But we also know that since this plan was published, the Chancellor has announced a package of measures worth 15 billion to help tackle the cost of living crisis. But I strongly believe that the measures contained within this report are still valid and indeed valuable. There are a number of ways that we already support those on lower incomes, from tenancy and benefits advice through to our council tax reduction scheme, but we can go further still. The action plan in the appendix sets out both what we do currently and what steps we plan to take to help our residents. I don't plan to list them all individually, but they include a new cost of living coordinator to work with our partners across the district, the expansion of our social prescribing scheme, and the local welfare assistance scheme that was set up by Suffolk public sector leaders. What I hope this report also makes clear is that we will continue to utilise Mid-Suffolk's particular strengths to ensure that the support we offer is data-driven and targeted to those most in need, that we work in collaboration with our partners across the Suffolk system, and as much as possible we aim to prevent those who have fallen on hard times from suffering a deterioration in their broader health and well-being. In closing, I would just like to reflect on the purpose of it, or the wider purpose of this paper, and what it is asking us to do. As I mentioned, the government has already announced a large packet of measures to help with this particular issue, and so what we're effectively deciding today, in my opinion, is whether our role as a district council is simply to be a passive distributor of government monies, or whether we believe it is our place to be proactive and practical in the support we provide to our residents. I firmly believe this should be the latter, and it goes almost exactly to what Councillor Gould said earlier, that actually I want us to utilise this opportunity to be playing that leadership role in our communities, and I hope this action plan does just that. I'm very happy to therefore propose the recommendations in this report and to endorse this action plan to Cabinet, and would ask for a seconder. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Richardson. Councillor Flatman.
I'm very happy to second the report, Chair.
Thank you. Do we have any questions from members? Councillor Wellham.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I welcome the plan as well, but I'm wondering how much of it is already being done and what are completely new initiatives. So my questions are as follows. We no doubt need extra staff. What is the cost to Mid-Suffolk of implementing this plan? When will the cost of living coordinator take up their post? It says in summer. Now, summer could be June, July or August, and I can't imagine it will be June, but I hope it's July. Obviously, it could be an existing member of staff. who's put into that post. And are any other new members of staff or any changes within the organisation needed? In terms of the cost, I guess it breaks down to staffing projects and payments to others. So I'm not expecting answers to all of these today, but if I could have those at some point. But how will outputs be measured? We've got a list of inputs here. We need to know what our outputs are, our KPIs, I guess, almost, but what outputs we're aiming for and how they will be measured. So we know that we are actually being successful with this plan in alleviating the cost of living crisis. And my last point, and I always ask this sort of question because I represent a rural area, how will residents in rural areas without their own private transport be able to access, for instance, gyms, swimming pools, healthy eating, all the initiatives that are listed in there? If you can't get out of your house, how are you going to be helped by this 5-point plan? Thank you.
Councillor Richardson.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'll try and answer that as best I can, but I might invite officers to come in if there are any particular points. Looking at, I think if I just take them as I've sort of made a note of them, in terms of the overall cost, I think you're quite right, Councillor Wellham. Effectively what this does is bring together in a really coherent, or hopefully in a really coherent and cohesive way, a mixture of things we've either already committed to or that work is going on with the Poverty Board, with Suffolk County Council, or some new initiatives. So what it does is just bring that together in a really sort of integrated way to make sure that we're looking at this in the round. So the details on the cost will be a mixture of spend that we've currently agreed versus some additional that we're responsible for distributing. In terms of the cost of living facilitator, I think you've sort of almost answered that question in part of what you said, insofar as that would obviously depend on who the exact candidate is, what their existing notice period was, whether they were an internal or external candidate. So that, I think, is something we wouldn't have the detail on at the moment. Ditto new members of staff, I think that's a bit tricky to answer because simply because some of this stuff is work that's already ongoing. We have expanded the Communities and Wellbeing team quite recently, 4 new roles to assist in exactly the delivery of this type of work. So it's sort of a slightly blended approach. In terms of outputs and measurements, I think for the most part, this is where it gets a little bit complicated. So some of it will be in the delivery plan that we have for the wellbeing strategy and for the community strategy, for example. Others, bits of data, so around the holiday activity and food programme, that data sits with the county council, so it isn't easy to measure all of that in sort of one coherent way. I think that answers most things, but if officers would like to jump in at any point, then happy to defer to them. Thank you, Chair.
Nadeem or Vicky, do you want to come in?
I'm hoping you can hear me. Oh, yeah, you can. Sorry. Yeah, I think Councillor Richardson answered most of those points. I mean, I just would add another. Once we have appointed the cost of living coordinator and systems are further embedded, we'll then understand the intelligence better in terms of some of that partnership working, particularly in relation to the impact that that post is going to make.
Thank you very much. Councillor Wellham, do you want to come back on that?
Yeah, Chair, the question about how will people live, residents, housebound residents in rural areas benefit from this 5-point plan because they don't have their own access to private transport or public transport. So that is a key issue for my ward.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, if I may, and apologies, I missed off that question. So I think that's part of where this targeted approach comes in. So we know that with individuals with particular health needs or particular mobility issues, we can work as part of our integrated neighbourhood teams with our partners in health and social care to make sure that we get bespoke solutions to individuals based on their individual circumstances and their need.
Councillor Stringer.
Thank you, Chair. Really good to have a plan and good to see that we've now got one. Just one observation I make. Given this council put back into reserves almost the entire budget the county used for lifting people out of fuel poverty, should there not have been an energy conservation element to this plan, given we have the expertise in-house vis-à-vis building control, etc., etc. So I'm just wondering, good to have a plan, but should we have perhaps included a slice that included lifting people out of fuel poverty and energy conservation?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, very good point, Councillor Stringer. I think one of the sort of key parts of this, I won't be able to find it sort of doing it live, but is a commitment that we continually review this action plan. So if there are further down the line other elements that we think will be particularly valuable, then those can be included, particularly around energy usage and energy efficiency. Obviously, I imagine that will become of a greater importance as we move towards the end of the year and as we approach winter. So I'm sure that's something we could happily look at over the next coming months.
Thank you. So does anybody wish to debate this item? Councillors, Cabinet? Councillor Flatman.
I'd just like to add that we have a lot of community activity going on, and with our location officers that will be taking a locality each, they will be liaising with parish councils, with groups to find out exactly where that need is, and also with our leisure providers in Stowmarket and Stradbroke, they will be looking to deliver some activities in villages and at home sometimes. So, you know, it is all going on, but it is just, you know, that finding where the need is. But, and I think, you know, people are very much together at the moment. So if someone needed a lift to a village hall, I think that community spirit is there. And hopefully we will see a lot more of that community spirit going forward, and our locality officers can pick up on that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Flatman. Thank you, Councillor Richardson. So I'd just like to add my thanks to Nadeem and thank him for all the work that he's done on this together with his team, with Vicky and the rest of the team. So we're really sorry to be losing you, Nadeem. Your stay with us has been short and powerful. Thank you. So the recommendations are to agree the 5-point plan attached at Appendix 1 and to delegate to the Assistant Director for Communities and Wellbeing in consultation with the Cabinet Member for Wellbeing to keep this plan under review and also to update it in response to emerging need. So I'm going to ask the Governance Officer to conduct the vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. The vote is now in progress. Chair, may I have your vote, please?
4. Thank you.
Chair, that is 8 votes for. That's unanimous.
Thank you very much. Item 10, MCA/22/4 is the Stowmarket LCA, Overview and Scrutiny Committee recommendations. And I'm going to invite the Cabinet Member for Housing and also Communities to introduce the report. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll go first if Councillor Flatman doesn't mind. Each year, Mid-Suffolk Council and Citizens Advice help people to find a way forward with housing advice, money and debt advice, and by supporting them to navigate their way through the systems to overcome different problems. Mid-Suffolk Council and Citizens Advice understand that people need different types of support at various times in their life and believe individuals should be able to get help in the way that works for them and meets their needs. Together, we can better support some of the most vulnerable and marginalised people in our district, sharing the same aims, working collaboratively, and working with local people for the benefit of the community. Our trusted partnership already enables us to understand, respond, and adapt to local needs, and we already share information and initiate action. However, there is a need to develop the partnership and improve the joined-up working between the Housing Directorate and Citizens Advice to make it strong enough to support our residents moving forward, offering robust and resilient solutions and services that will make our communities stronger. Thank you.
I am pleased to see that the recommendations from the joint overview and scrutiny meeting on the 20th of September and 20th of December are addressed by the Council's response to the cost of living crisis explained in the previous report and the cost of living action plan. I am particularly looking forward to establishing a cost of living coordinator which will continue to build on the substantial operations we already have in place, including customer service, housing and welfare support, and external partnerships to ensure that partners are talking to each other in meeting people's needs. The appointment of a dedicated cost of living officer to coordinate work, systems and data will strengthen already strong partnerships, arrangements and will support activity that not only delivers much of the activities set out in the cost of living action plan, but also satisfies the recommendations made by Overview and Scrutiny Committee in September and December 2021. The recommendations are detailed in this report and I ask Cabinet agree the recommendations set out in 3.1. And just to add, the post will be across Baber and Mid-Suffolk and will be funded by a payment received by the Council for DLUHC, which obviously is the levelling up housing and communities. Thank you. And we will ask for a seconder, please.
Is Councillor Haddingham proposing and Councillor Flatman seconding?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Sorry to put words in your mouth.
Yes, we're happy to do that, Chair.
Thank you. Do we have any questions from members? Councillor Wellham?
Chair, I've got quite a number of questions. Having been Chair of Overview and Scrutiny, we're referring here to 2 meetings of Overview and Scrutiny. So what I'd like to ask is what actions have already been taken and what agreements have already been reached with citizens' advice in respect of the joint overview and scrutiny recommendation of the 20th of September 2021 that urgent action is taken to improve joined up working and creation of a jointly funded post. I ask because local community advice and joint overview and scrutiny considered this to be urgent 8 months ago, and it looks as if you're relying on the cost of living coordinator, so it could well be sort of 12 months. We could be around to August, September by the time that post is filled. So what steps have already been taken and what improvements have been realised?
We do have strong links with our Citizens Advice Bureau, and I know Nadeem has been having meetings with them on a regular basis. We have taken all the comments from Overview and Scrutiny and taken those forward. The answer to your question on the cost of living coordinator, this post, will have responsibility to ensure that our partnership arrangements are strengthened, systems are in process and aligned where possible, improve the sharing of information to better target our support, and to ensure that resources follow priorities to those most in need. Yes, we are in process of this interview process, so as soon as that happens, but we are already working closely with our partners. The Suffolk public sector leaders have underwritten £1 million for cost of living support, which will support the CAs across Suffolk with food and fuel vouchers, etc. And Mid-Suffolk District Council has provided an uplift to the Mid-Suffolk CA revenue grant for 22-23. So it is it's all happening.
And sorry, can I just add to that? I'm not going to come up with the facts and figures that Julie has, but I just want to say that I feel that our relationship with the CB is already better than it was, say, a year ago. And with when Simon Clifton first came on, I think he and Vicky Stewart have already got a good relationship together, and I think it's already a lot better than it has been previously.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I don't...
I'd just like to bring Nadine in first. Thank you.
I would absolutely echo what both of the councillors have just stated. I would also add that we regularly meet with the CAB. We have regular conversations in relation to information and intelligence that we've shared, and in terms of developing the cost of living plan, the CAB has helped inform those recommendations as outlined by Councillor Richardson. So there is a really good relationship between the council and the CAB. What I'd also add, just on the point on urgency, it didn't require a scrutiny report to emphasise that urgency. That urgency has already been, we've already been having conversations about those urgency issues and been working on how we respond to those issues. So as Councillor Flatman has said, this is an ongoing engagement and partnership with the CAB. And as Councillor Lavinia has just said, we have enhanced that relationship with the CAB.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, yes, I'm aware that the partnership is working much better. One of the concerns from the citizens' advice was that they didn't have direct contact details in terms of telephone numbers of Mid-Suffolk housing staff. So prior to September 2021, and I hope this has now changed and you can confirm whether or not it has, the only way that citizens' advice staff could contact housing was through the 0300 number. I trust that that now has been sorted out. Thank you. Can I ask a question about food banks? There is a response in respect to food banks in the report, and I'd ask for further clarification from the Cabinet member, if I may. The request from CAs was that food banks supported by Mid-Suffolk, or Baber Mid-Suffolk, refer recipients of food to citizens' advice for advice. You've referred to the other way round in the report, but what was important from the point of view of citizens' advice was that rather than the same people go back time and time again to food banks, that it was almost a requirement of the person receiving the food to sort of break the cycle by requiring them to go to citizens' advice for advice on nutrition, finance, benefits and so on. So has there been any progress on that, please?
Sure. So just two things. Firstly, we are aware that there was a report that came from the Citizens Advice Bureau in relation to food usage. And as I just stated, in terms of informing the cost of living action plan, that intelligence that came from the Citizens Advice Bureau has informed those recommendations that have come forward. In addition to that, particularly in relation to the food economy, we've looked at this two ways. One, we've wanted to understand some of the issues and the needs that we need to address, and that's why we have some of those recommendations. But also, what we're focusing on is how do we actually break the cycle. And what we mean by that is, how do we support communities to help themselves? So one of the recommendations in the cost of living plan is to identify any green spaces where communities actually grow their own produce. And in doing so, we're enabled to build resilient communities, support families, and actually have that much better nutritional value. And just as also another precursor, we're working with the county in relation to a piece of work that they're undertaking with food banks, including working with the Citizens Advice Bureau, in terms of understanding some of those causal issues. So we know that there is work underway, and once that research has been undertaken, concluded, we will then respond to those recommendations accordingly too.
If I may, please, and that's around funding.
Councillor Wellen, just before you move off of food banks, I'd also like to add that at Suffolk Public Sector Leaders Group last week, we approved over £1 million to go towards hardship funding as well. Something like where is it? 60 plus food banks across Suffolk are already funded, and this is via self-service and also from £800,000 winter grant scheme that SPSL have funded. Carry on with your next question.
Yeah, thank you for that, Chair. Yeah, I think the point that the citizens' advice we're making, it's not as important to put money into food banks as it is to make sure that the people come out of food poverty by looking at other things like nutrition, benefits, finance and so on. But thank you for that. Could you please, Cabinet Member, confirm that LCAs will be informed in good time, say by December 2022, of the agreed uplift to the 2023-24 grant? Citizens' advice are concerned that, well, obviously Mid-Suffolk is one of their major sources of funding, but in the past that level of funding hasn't been agreed until the February. That's just 2 months before the start of their financial year. They really need to know a bit earlier than that, which was the reason why Overview and Scrutiny asked for the inflation uplift to be agreed year on year, not just each separate February. Thank you.
Sorry. Is this on? Okay. Yeah, one of the recommendations from Overview and Scrutiny was to index link the CA revenue grant. But with the financial support in the Suffolk system at the moment and the improvements to be developed by the cost of living coordinator, I don't think index linking the revenue grant is the most appropriate action to take. It sets expectation to other organisations in receipt of revenue grants and presents the need. But I do hope that we can just inform CA, yes, you are going to get your usual money. And yes, there may be each year, but we can't say if we're going to give them, it won't be index linked, I can tell you that. But we may be looking at how much we give them each year. And I know you said, can they be informed that they are going to get it? Well, I'm sure we can do that they know they're going to get their money as per usual.
Thank you, Councillor Flatman. Nadine, did you want to come back on that?
I did, yes. Thank you, Chair. 2 points. Firstly, Councillor Wellham will be aware that we have given a 30% in-year uplift to the Citizens Advice Bureau. And even if we just, for example, focused on inflation and the index link, that 30% actually surpasses that point. The second point that I would just make is this, that our staff regularly meet with the Citizens Advice Bureau, so it's not just as part of the budget cycle, we have an ongoing conversation. We want to understand their operating models, any issues, demands that we need to respond to, and in that context, be able to respond accordingly in terms of any recommendations we put forward in any budget setting process going forward. That helps with having a really mature conversation with the Citizens Advice Bureau, but it also enables us to start really thinking about how the Citizens Advice Bureau can actually influence us, but also how we can actually influence that economy. And if I just give you that as an example, one of the things that it says in the cost of living plan, that in terms of third sector community organisations, because of COVID, were able to digitise some of their operating models. That created much more resilience in the system. Some of the kind of initiatives that we're looking at this moment in time is putting in place pop-up clinics in those areas, for example, where we're not able to deploy resources. We're only able to do that is because digitisation has taken place in terms of those operating models. So what we are saying to the Citizens Advice Bureau is that if we're going to ask you to deploy resources, we need to make sure that what we don't do is destabilise some of your operations. And in that context, how do we have a much more mature conversation in relation to the resources that you require? So the point I'm making, Councillor Wellham, is that the conversation has really moved on since the report that Scrutiny discussed and the recommendations that were put forward.
Can I just say thank you for that? One of the difficulties is that members generally don't know what's going on. I mean, that's all really good news, or most of it's really good news. And I know that you were unhappy with the suggestion that there should be an observer at Citizens Advice Trustees meetings, but in the absence of an observer, could we have regular feedback of how things are going at Citizens Advice? At this present time, it is a really important resource that we have out there that's, I mean, it's like an extra department of the District Council, and we don't know what's going on. It would be useful if we did have more information, perhaps, from the Cabinet member. Thank you.
Yeah, happy for that to occur.
And if I can just add, Councillor Haddingham, Councillor Flatman and I regularly meet with Simon Clifton at the Citizens Advice, and also all councillors get a quarterly update direct from the CAB straight into their inboxes, telling them what's going on. Anybody wish to debate this? Okay. So the recommendations are that Cabinet considers the report from Joint Overview and Scrutiny and agrees their response to the recommendations in the report as detailed in paragraph 4, in line with the Council's response to the cost of living crisis and the in line with the Council's response to the cost of living crisis and the 5-point plan that will look at a better system of connectivity between partners, including the local Citizens Advice, the Council and system-wide partners. And I'm now going to ask the Governance Officer to conduct the vote.
Thank you, members. The vote is now in progress. Chairman, I'd like to take your vote, please. Thank you. Chair, that is 8 votes for, that's unanimous.
Excellent. Thank you. Moving on to item 11 is MCA/22/5, the Stowmarket Health, Education, Leisure Facilities, known as SHELF, and I'm going to invite the Cabinet member for Health and Wellbeing to introduce the report. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm delighted to introduce the initial business case for the Stowmarket Health, Education and Leisure Facility and to outline the next steps that, if approved, we will take to further develop this proposal. This facility, better known as the Shelf Project, represents a significant programme of work that would considerably enhance the sport and leisure provision within Mid-Suffolk, facilitate the much-needed expansion of Stowmarket High School, and develop a new innovative wellbeing hub to enable the co-location of services with our partners in health and social care. Particular highlights in the sport provision include a 4G football pitch, a mini-track athletics facility, 4 new indoor sport courts, a new sport pavilion, a new cricket square, and a multi-surface perimeter track. I am perhaps unsurprisingly, especially excited about the prospect of a wellbeing hub in the heart of Mid-Suffolk. For those colleagues who were able to attend the site visits to Colchester and Mildenhall, we were able to see just how effective these facilities can be and how popular they are with both service providers and service users. This project would also represent a major realisation of our wellbeing strategy and the updated leisure, sport and physical activity strategy, both of which were published last year. There is a broader point here as well that I would like to stress, that despite the pressures and challenges of the COVID-19 pandemic, both on finance and personnel, Mid-Suffolk is still in a position to be potentially making a major investment in our communities. On a practical level, this paper is asking Cabinet to endorse the initial business case and the cost of £700,000 as outlined in paragraph 6.4 to take this project to its next stage. If approved by Cabinet, this will then be considered by full council at the end of the month, and the intention would then be to develop these proposals further, including finalised detail on cost and funding, with a full business case submitted to Cabinet and full council, again aiming by the end of this year. Finally, I'd like to add my thanks to Councillor Brewster, who unfortunately can't be here, and to the economy team for leading on this work and engaging so proactively with such a large number of stakeholders right across our community and indeed with other national sporting bodies. In short, I think this is a really exciting and ambitious opportunity for Mid-Suffolk, and so I'm very happy to propose the recommendations in the paper, and I would look for a seconder. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Flackman?
I've got to second it, haven't I? I mean, what a fantastic project with a school, with a mental health hub there for teenagers to use as well. The sports facilities are going to be absolutely wonderful. And thank you to Fiona and her team for organising the trip for us to go to Colchester Mildenhall and look round where everything's going to go at Stowmarket. Is absolutely brilliant. And if we can get anything near what Mildenhall had, but I expect ours will be better, don't you? Yeah, absolutely. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. So this report contains confidential appendices. So if members wish to question and debate those appendices, then the meeting will go into closed session and then come back to public session for the debate. And the vote will be taken in open session. So do we have any questions from members? Councillor Weller?
What I'd really like to do is thank Fiona and others for the opportunities that a number of us have had to look at the details and make comment. So if I've got to ask a question, it will have to be, can we please continue to look at the accessibility for on foot, on cycle, and the potential for car sharing and so on, because there's going to be a lot of traffic generated by this project, and we need to make sure that we get people there safely, cross the road safely, and from one area to the other, and without using too many 4x4s and large vehicles to get there. Thank you. I don't think it needs an answer, but I had to put it in the form of a question.
You don't mean it's not actually a question? Would you mind turning the mic off? Thank you. Councillor Richardson?
Thank you, Chair. I'll just say yes.
Councillor Field?
Thank you. I think this is a question. Obviously an excellent thing to be doing. I'm always aware that when Lakenham Fields was developed, there was money put aside for sports development at Claydon High, which obviously is not that far from Stowmarket, but is a different community. So there's sort of £200,000 there, and another £200,000 for Bramford picnic site that could be diverted. I just wondered whether there's any possibility that you will be encouraging perhaps something, obviously not as grand, but something similar in what is actually Councillor Whitehead's area nowadays. But, it would be good not to see all that cash disappear back into dare I say, a builder's pockets.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the question, Councillor Field. I'll be careful what I do say on the question of some of the funding, because that will stray into the confidential and exempt items. In terms of, I think, just one point about sort of a broader reflection on this particular project is that it's been, or the prospect of this project, I should say, is very much contingent on a number of different converging factors. So the fact that it is co-located next to our leisure centre, the fact that Stowmarket High is already relatively, it's been acknowledged that it needs to expand, the fact that there's a large amount of land available, the fact that there's a development site attracting sill next to it, I think are all sort of major contributing factors to how we can take this forward. But obviously it's not to say that we wouldn't be looking at other potential improvements across the district as an entirely separate to this project. What I think is worth reflecting on, the reason why we've at the moment taken this forward, and what we tend to be guided by, is a lot of the provision that's outlined in the actual site plan itself has been based on the needs assessment that was completed as part of the leisure, sport and physical activity strategy last year. So that identified particular shortfalls where Mid-Suffolk didn't have the same facilities that other better equipped areas in the country did have, and so that's obviously informed the planning around this particular project. But certainly we know that this won't satisfy all of our needs, so there'll be other opportunities that will arise in the future. Thank you, Chair.
I do think it a bit unfair to ask Councillor Richardson a question that's not in the paper, but thank you for your reply anyway, Councillor Richardson. So, given that we have no confidential questions, questions on the confidential papers, Councillor Richardson, not Richardson, Whitehead, sorry.
Yeah, I have some real concerns about the finance, and basically, almost what the first sentence of the first part of the question would delve into the confidential area, I think.
So you want to go into okay. So, to go into closed session, we need to consider whether, pursuant to Part 1 of Schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972, the public should be excluded from the meeting for the business specified below on the grounds that if the public were present during this item, it is likely that there would be the disclosure to them of exempt information as indicated against the item. The author of the report proposed to be considered in Part 2 of the agenda is satisfied that the public interest in maintaining the exemption outweighs the public interest in disclosing the information. So could I have a proposer and seconder to go into private session? Thank Councillor Richardson and Councillor Whitehead. Thank you. Can you conduct the vote, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. The vote is in progress on your app. Chair, may I take your vote, please? 4. Thank you. Councillor Gould?
I'm 4.
4. And Councillor Byrne? Right, thank you.
We're now into debate. Who wants to debate this item? No? Okay. So the recommendations are that Cabinet considers and approves the master plan at Appendix A and the initial business case at Appendix B, which is restricted, for the proposed scheme, which includes an indicative cost plan and funding strategy. That Cabinet notes the work to date on the partnership strategy, Appendix A, which is restricted, and future management models, Appendix D, also restricted, for the new hub as detailed. That Cabinet endorses the recommendations to Council for further funding to complete the scheme to detailed design stage and submission of a planning application. Next management modelling and a 2-year partnership coordinator to fully maximise current and future partnership working and collaboration across the site outlined in section 6.4. And I'm going to now ask the Governance Officer to conduct the vote.
Thank you, Chair. The vote is now in progress. Chair, may I take your vote, please? 4. Thank you. Thank you. That is 8 votes for, and that's unanimous, Chair.
Thank you very much. So that concludes today's business, Cabinet business. The date and time of the next meeting is scheduled for Monday the 4th of July and will start at 10:30.